Hi, this video clip is recorded to answer the question of why does the fish eye keeps the same frame per second when decreasing resolution. So to answer this, I'd like to talk about fisheye real quickly. First of all, what does fisheye do? Fisheye is designed to get an overview of the room. It's designed to capture the entire room with no line of sight. It can see left to right or 360 degree. Fisheye is not designed for evidence detail. It's not designed for fast movement recording. Fisheye is designed for overview. It's not designed to capture detail. So how do we use the fisheye? We get a fisheye in the middle to get an overview, and then we get fixed camera to watch the important areas such as cashier, such as the door. Okay? So the fisheye for level 1 is designed to capture maximum frame per second at maximum resolution. So for example, 15 FPS at 5 megapixel or 7 FPS at 10 megapixel. If we decrease the resolutions, frame rate does not increase. The reason why is because of the hardware limitations, or actually it's because of the design that we implement in the fisheye, and I'll explain later. So if people want to increase frame per second at lower resolution, we should suggest him to go buy a 2 megapixel or 3 megapixel fixed camera. Okay? So now we talk about scaling. What is scaling? Scaling is different from cropping. Cropping is you have a picture. Let's say this is a 5 megapixel picture. Cropping is crop an area from 5 megapixel to 2 megapixel, and that's the picture. That's called cropping. As you can see, anything outside the white area is missing video. So cropping is actually a method that's easier to use for the CPU. Let me put it back. It's easier to use for the CPU, so cropping requires very low CPU computing power. View area decreases. Scaling, on the other hand, is different. Go to scaling. What is scaling? Let me show you. Scaling is instead of just taking a piece of the photo or the video, we do the entire video into 2 megapixel. So what you just see there is, here is the white area. What is that? That's the missing 3 megapixel because I decreased from 5 megapixel to 2 megapixel. But guess what? Even though my picture is 2 megapixel, it is still the whole picture. I'm not losing any corner here. Do you see the difference? Let me do it again. This is a 5 megapixel picture. Cropping into 2 mega. This is what happened. You lose the surrounding area. Okay? Scaling is to take the entire picture and I shrink the picture into 2 megapixel. I'm still missing 3 megapixel of resolution, but at least I still have the entire video, entire room. So that explains the difference between scaling and cropping. Now let me go back to this. If we talk about the 5 megapixel mini dome, 5 megapixel mini fish eye, you know, the maximum resolution is 5 megapixel, the maximum frame per second is 15 frames per second. You ask the fisheye to give you a 2 megapixel picture, is it still at 15 frames per second? The reason why it's still at 15 frames per second is because the camera firmware is telling the sensor to still output 15 frames per second at 5 megapixel. And the camera ISP does scaling to decrease that 5 MP to 2 MP. Okay? If we do cropping, If we ask the sensor to do cropping, this is what's going to happen. Sensor originally output 5 MP at 15 frames per second. Ask him to do 2 MP using cropping to achieve 30 frames per second. Yes, the sensor can do that, but we're missing the corner. So our firmware does not go with that approach. We ask the sensor to output 5 megapixel at 15 frames instead of telling the sensor to output 2 megapixel at 30 frames, so we can take the whole picture and do scaling, not cropping. Why? Going back to our point, this is why. We want the entire picture to get smaller into 2 megapixel, 3 megapixel, 2 megapixel, or 1 megapixel. Yes, the resolution is smaller, but I still have the whole picture. And that is the reason why LevelOne uses scaling to decrease resolution, and that's why we are stick with the same frame per second, no matter it is 2 mega or 2 mega or 1 or even VGA. We still keep the same 15 frames. And for axis, it should be the same way. If you go check their M33307, resolution 5 mega, frame per second 12, and then you don't see any other frame per second different resolutions. So this is how it's done. And the reason why a fisheye camera does not accept cropping is because people buy fisheye to see the entire overview. And then if you accept cropping, that means you are missing the corner, and people no longer have the point of buying your fisheye. That's all. Thank you very much.